Hello, I'm Paul Muldoon, and I am a Griffin trustee, as they say. And one of the perks of being a Griffin trustee is that we get to speak to some of our favorite poets, in this case, who have been shortlisted for the Griffin Prize. And it's a real delight to be able to talk today to Ed Roberson. I've been a fan of his for a long time, and his book, Asked What Has Changed, is a finalist for the prize. Ed, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the prize.
Well, tell me
Sure.
a little bit about. I mean, you've been writing poems for a long time, and what have you learned over the years?
Mm, I started out kind of liking form and structure and balancing, and over the years, even though I experimented with ways to disrupt that and ways to rethink that, I I'm amazed at how much I like the architecture of poems and how much the architecture of poems actually talks. Um, the shapes of poems actually say things and carry weight and carry meaning. And I sort of knew that at the beginning, but I'm learning more and more about it as time goes on.
And these would be what are known sometimes as inherited forms or traditional forms or versions of them. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, not so much following very carefully the forms, but investigating the form and saying, well, why does the form exist? What is it supposed to do? And does it do it today the way it was supposed to do back then? Does it entertain today the way it was supposed to entertain back then? If entertaining or informing or something is to be carried in the poem, in the form, what's happening now? What can I make it do? And that's been sort of exciting for me.
There is something about the poem of, let's say, 12 to 16 lines. Let's just use
Hmm.
that as a metric. There's something
Hmm.
about the duration of that poem,
Hmm.
both
Hmm.
essentially, actually, in terms of how much time as well as space it takes
Hmm.
up in the world, eh,
Hmm.
which I think is somewhat fascinating. Do you have thoughts on
Hmm.
it?
I yeah, I agree with you. I When I was young, I started this is before I started to think about writing poetry. Um, I started to look at sonnets really carefully, the way they were put together and the way they carried information, um, and the kind of reasoning. And I think you're right about that. It's you only have so much time to carry on an idea, and even when you're looking at when you're making an observation. I was talking to a poet last week about this. You're creating an image or an observation, and halfway through the image, some sensibility takes a look askance, and you get this weird image, or a weird way of naming the object you thought you were looking at. Something in you says, "Hey, you missed this," and so you end up where you're expected, but you also come in with a little bit more baggage, a little bit more information. And I like that kind of thing. Playing with the duration, see how much you can get in, um, and see how much you can argue over that period of time and balance the periods of times so that you make a kind of not only balance of argument, balance of time, balance of feeling, and you end up with a nice balanced poem. To my way of thinking, that's the way I try to do it.
Well,
So
you
sonnets are always interesting to me for that, or variations of it. I hardly ever write a straight sonnet, you know.
right. Listen, it would be wonderful to hear one of the poems from the book. Is that possible, do you think?
Yes. Um, this isn't a sonnet. This is one of those kind of observations through time. This is called the listening. We always think we are listening from a distance, but in a state where the wildfires move 83 feet per minute, we might not be fast enough to outdistance events anymore. We can go up in a puff prior to any announcement, up in smoke. Up in smoke used to mean disappear, but half the state, useless though it is still here. The poisonous smoke settling back through the blank ground, that cataract it all went over.
That's brilliant. You know,
Thank you.
perspective, distance. These are two very these are two themes of the book. I would say. Would that be right from your perspective?
Um, yes, yes. Um, the, the I'm always asked about where did the book come from, and there was an editor who's putting together a an anthology of poetry focusing on climate change, ecological problems, and I was one of the writers that he asked to submit, and in the letter he gave a list of problems and questions that he kind of wanted the poems to address. And the very first question was um, in light of, and he listed a bunch of disasters, glaciers melting. In light of this, how has your work changed? What has changed in your world? And it's sort of like I kind of laughed. That's a dumb question. Not that's an obvious question. Everything has changed. And it's sort of like that. And I sort of laughed at myself and laughed at the question. But then I thought, oh yeah, you need to say that everything has changed. Even looking out the window has changed. That idol that you used to sort of your teachers would get after you for staring out, resting outside the window. That's not a rest anymore as an adult. These days, it's a little bit of anxiousness as though you're staring not just at the clouds, but at some kind of doomsday clock. So staring out the window has changed. And the whole book, I had poems all over the place, on the desk, and I began to look at things as answering that, what has changed.
You know, I think that image of what the idea of what going up in smoke used to mean is such a deft way of getting to the heart of this. And what I love about that poem and a number of the other poems here is how you're not, as it were, virtue signaling, you know, the
Mhm.
importance of, our being aware of climate change. I mean, I think that's always a little concern for poets. I mean, well, am I going to, should I say that I'm in favor of climate change? Isn't that I'm against climate change, or am I in favor of climate change? No, we wouldn't want that. The, but I think you've done it with such a terrific grace, and really appreciate that. Maybe there's
Thank
another
you.
short poem that you would, not that we're in any rush, uh, that you'd like to read for us.
Uh, I kind of like this one. Uh, it's sense, and it's kind of tries to describe a sense. Out in the clouds, The panicked herd of heat lightning gallops back and forth, corralled into a sky fenced by earth into everywhere overhead. The animal, at the grounded mercy of what it can't hear, but is coming underneath the audible. The smell before the storms that raises those hairs, the ears that lift your head out of the crowd before the nose even catches on, wind of which you can't see, of what, if anything, there, except answer, is a full leap ahead of any question, an alertness that runs you last to die.
Brilliant. Ed Roberson, we're thrilled that you're shortlisted for this prize. And I can tell you your title is Asked What Has Changed. Um, one of the things that hasn't changed is your great capacity to be equal to the world, and we thank you for it. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it. Thank you. Bye bye now.
Bye.